part of my vacation.
You're a trooper.
Oh, what the heck.
Well, are you reading any good books on vacation?
I am reading a giant Ken Follett book. It's a novel, Fall of Giants.
Oh, that's a great novel series.
Yeah. So it's 1,000-pager. So don't know if I'm going to totally finish it yet. I go back to work. Actually, I start back on July the 4th. So.
Wow. Okay.
Part of tomorrow is reserved for Hamilton on Disney Plus.
Oh, okay. I forgot that was happening.
Yeah.
Forgot? It's so important.
Pastor Dollison.
Good afternoon. How are you today?
Welcome. Good. Good to see you.
Hello.
Likewise.
What's your son doing in the theater world these days? Is he?
That's my daughter, actually. But
Your daughter, excuse me.
Yeah, I think they've been doing some things. She did something with Black Lives Matter with YouTube the other day, and but everything's kind of closed up until next year. I think they're kind of anticipating that that's going to be kind of not happening until that time, because theaters are typically packed.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting, she had several good roles that she was actually looking forward to playing. So that was the tough part of it.
Sure.
She did Oklahoma last. They closed the show. The last of Oklahoma.
Uh-oh.
All right, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Hey, Father Chris, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Wonderful.
So you mentioned about your daughter obviously not performing. Is she finding some work or doing something also?
Yeah, she's at home being a mother. She had her first child, so they've got a 1-year-old at the house. So that's been her passion of late, and so she's kind of enjoying motherhood.
Excellent.
Congratulations.
Oh yeah, we're excited. But the sad part, I would love to see them. It's been a while, but being in New York, it makes it very challenging. So we haven't had a chance. We've been Zoom. Well, we actually been doing a lot of FaceTime, and that's kind of how she knows us. We hope that'll change before too long.
Yeah. We got to be a little bit worried. Our grandson, if you go to his yard, my daughter goes and they see him, and he thinks that she's on a screen, will run up and they're trying to social distance, but he'll touch her just to make sure she's real.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Or sad. I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is. It is. But thank God you have at least that option.
Right. Yeah.
Because otherwise it would just be a voice on the end. And so I think I guess you'd have to be thankful what you do have. So I'm just glad you're here. Yeah.
Well, Leah, should we get started?
Yes.
Okay. Reverend Lucky, you want to open us in prayer?
Yes, sir. I will. Let us pray. Agile, imaginative, and adaptable God, as we prepare for a Justice Ministry conference like no other, remind us that even in its new and virtual format, it will be in most ways just like usual. As always, there will be people, your people, and as always, they will be hungry for the tools to do justice in their cities. As always, they will be in need of encouragement and hope, and as always, they will be in need of reminders of the usefulness of channeled anger and the necessity of being organized to build power in order to make all of our cities places where your empire reigns and where your narrative dominates. And so bless our preparation today, and as always, push us forward to be bold and to be brave. Amen.
And
Amen. So let me just make a couple of remarks, and I think let's do formal introductions. So let's go around, and if you could share your name, your organization, and city, and how long you've been part of the Justice Ministry. And start with Pastor Lorna.
Hi, I'm Pastor Lorna Bowden. I am with Tecumseh United Methodist Church. We are a part of Topeka Jump, and we actually were with them from the onset, so it's been 7 years.
Okay. And Ron Lucky?
I'm with Build in Lexington, Kentucky, and have been since its founding 17, 18 years ago.
Okay. Doug?
Good afternoon, everyone. Doug Smith. I'm with Gethsemane Worship Center in Topeka, Kansas, also part of Topeka Jump, and have been a part of the Justice Ministry for the last 7 years.
Okay, great. Andy?
Andy Lee. I am the lead organizer at both Justice in Broward County, Florida. I've been organizing with DART for almost 16 years now, and 14 of them here in Broward County.
Leah?
I'm Leah Wiley with DART. I'm in Tallahassee, Florida. I've been with DART in 2 different positions over the past 15 years, organizing in St. Pete at FAST for 6.5 years, and then training director for the past 8 years.
Pastor Cooley? I think you're muted.
I tried my space bar, it didn't work. I'm Reverend Jean Cooley, and Good Samaritan Presbyterian United Church of Christ in Pinellas Park, and a member of FAST. And I was a member of Peace Polk County for 9 years, where I got my first training with Reverend Dollison, and have been in FAST for 7 years now.
Okay. And Holly?
Holly Holcomb, helped found DART in 1982.
Father Chris?
I am Father Chris Hoffman, pastor of Our Lady of Hope Catholic Church in Port Orange, Florida, near Daytona, a member of Faith. And I've been involved with Faith here for the last 9 years, but I was actually at its inception about 20 some years ago, and also did a small stint in Polk County, and I was also involved with Peace Polk County as well. So total of somewhere around 25 years.
Father Dan?
Father Dan Knoll. I'm pastor at Mary Queen of the Holy Rosary Catholic Church in Lexington, Kentucky. Member of Build, and been in Justice Ministry there with Build for 10 years.
Okay. Freddie?
Freddie Wilson. I'm the associate organizer at Faith in Volusia County, and been there for 5 years.
Rob?
Rob Seaver Wagner, lead organizer with Bread since 2013. I've been in Jacksonville, Florida, and Springfield, Ohio, and DART since 2001.
Pastor Dollison?
Pastor Clifton Dollison, Peace, Polk County, pastor of the First Missionary Baptist Church in Winter Haven, Florida. And I have been with Peace, not from its inception, but shortly thereafter, for the past 17, almost 18 years, I believe now.
Okay. And Jennifer?
Jennifer Rulio, lead organizer with Build in Lexington, Kentucky. I've been here 4 years now and 8 years in the network.
Okay. So, I mean, Reverend Lucky prayed for the clergy conference that will be like no other, and yet it's the same. And he prayed my thoughts, that's for sure. I hope we never have to do another virtual Justice Ministry Conference, but we are going to do this one. And so appreciate all your help on this. One of the things that we've realized about presenting things in Zoom is, when you're face to face, it is possible to address a crowd of 100 or 200 people and call on people individually and keep the whole crowd engaged. That doesn't work so well on Zoom. First of all, you can only get, 36 people or something on your screen at one time. You can't see everybody. And it's pretty hard to listen, intently to the kind of TV, or the screen for an hour period of time. So what we've done with some of our substantive presentations is we've reorganized them in this fashion, so that there is a presentation, and then we get into breakout groups, and that is one of the nice things about Zoom, is there's a kind of a seamless transition, almost seamless, into breakout groups. So our thought is by presenting material and getting into a breakout groups, we can engage people in some conversation in those groups so that they have some deeper engagement with the material. So that's kind of the, educational philosophy, right? Is that we present and then we talk in breakout groups. And we really want to express our strong appreciation to all of you for helping to lead that, guide that conversation. I think we may actually have an opportunity to check in so that each person, in the breakout group has a deeper sense of, what the material is. So when we, so this basic presentation, competing cultures, and if you've been to the Justice Ministry Conference, you might remember the graphic that got put together a couple years ago, where we walk through how over a 20-30 year period, credit cards came to be the huge debt system that we have today. Because up until 1978, credit cards could not charge more than the usury rate in their local state, which was 8%, 6%, 10%. And now a good credit card rate is 14%. And how did that happen? And how there's 3,000 years of teaching in our faith tradition and our culture against the exorbitant charging of interest rates. So how did it come to pass that these laws and values about usury got overthrown? And so now the average credit card, a good rate is 14%, and a bad rate, the typical rate is like 25 or even 30%. So how did that happen, right? So that's kind of the opening section, and it sets up a conversation about the tension between the God of justice and the God of money, or the market God, or what the Holy Father, Pope Francis, calls the idolatry of money in the papal encyclical exhortation. I have to get my nomenclature right. So Father Dan or Father Chris will ding me for that. But in the Joy of the Gospel, the Holy Father says that the current situation is brought out by an idolatry of money and its dominion, which, if you think about it, that word means lordship over our life. And in various sermons, the Holy Father observes that, when a human dies of hunger, it is nothing. And when a bank loses 2 points on the stock market, it is a tragedy. That's sort of the context for, our culture. And then kind of the primary way in which the God of money, or the market God, or sometimes we call it Pharaoh's narrative, captures our imagination is with the stories of scarcity, fear, and despair. And really, and ultimately, that leads to the story of me, and mine, and God's story of abundance, hope, and promise, which is rooted in community. Like, I do better when we do better is the idea of community. We're all in this together, kind of thing. And then looking at three historical and biblical examples of prophets who confronted religious leaders who were beholden to the God of money and not witnessing to the God of justice. So that's kind of the basic outline of the presentation. Put a thumbs up if any of that sounds familiar. All right, we got some. Okay, so what we're asking you to do, there'll be 4 different sessions where there's a breakout group. And I'll go ahead and I think you have facilitators group instructions. I don't know if you have those up, or I can share the document. Do you have it, or do you want me to share it on the screen? Put a thumbs up if you have the document.
Go ahead and share it, John.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, okay. So the host has disabled screen sharing. Leah, make me a co-host.
Please.
Coming.
Okay. Still learning about Zoom.
Hey, Bobby.
So, so when you're a couple things about being in your group, and I'll call up the instructions, but we're gonna use the basic format is that you as a discussion group leader would give some thought to each of these questions and be ready to answer it first and give a brief answer, 60 seconds or less. And then now some of the questions are just call on one person to kind of get that point out. But when there's a time for a group to scoop where everybody's going to report, we want you to call on people individually in turns around the room. That's for 2 reasons, or 3 reasons. Okay. To ensure that everybody answers, to ensure that the conversation is not dominated by one person. And those are the kind of the 2 main reasons. And then if there is time left over, you could have general discussion. As the leader, as you're calling on people around the circle, please resist the temptation to elaborate on other people's kind of answers or comments. I mean, you could maybe give a word or 2 to summarize, but don't restate what they've said. That's easy to do, and avoid that temptation. And don't let other people do that either, because we want to make sure that everybody's talking and listening kind of an equal footing. As a leader, seek to understand and not to be understood. And yeah, there'll be 6 or 8 people in each of your groups. We're still working on the numbers, but you should not have more than 8 in your group. And then if there are people who are really problematic to deal with, take a note and report it to either the organizer with whom you work or one of the DART staff people. Myself, Leah, Holly, or Sarah Storr would be the primary contacts. So those are kind of some of the ground rules. Leah, still, I don't have the screen sharing enabled yet. Okay.
See if that works.
Okay. Yep, that's good.
Okay.
So All right, you should be looking at this section here. So those are the ground rules we've talked about. So um, um, the first question we want you to think about is, so we will present, Anne Marie Silveria will present kind of the story of how 3 millennia of values about usury were overthrown in 10 easy steps. That's a story of credit cards and usury. So, so we thought it would be helpful. It's a very dramatic kind of presentation, and there are usually powerful reactions. So just go ahead and think about, because most of us don't think about how credit cards came to be. We just have accepted that that's always been part of our economy. And it wasn't. Credit cards weren't actually invented until 1948, and they were always tied to usury rates until 1978, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that state usury caps were a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution. So think about what's your gut reaction to the story of credit cards and usury. The second discussion question is, what has your faith tradition taught you about the debt system? And that's important to distinguish, right? What has the tradition taught you about the debt system versus, what has your church taught you about debt? Because I'm aware of a lot of churches that teach people don't get into debt, but that's not the same as teaching people about the debt system. Does that make sense, Lorna?
It does.
Okay. And so the third question is, have you, a friend, a family member, loved one being caught up in the debt system, credit cards, student loan, mortgage, payday lending, other? What does that feel like? So you'll want to give some thought to how you want to answer that question. Doug, how would you say about that?
The third question, most definitely. I've been caught up in a debt system when I was a very young adult, still in college. I got my very first credit card, and I thought, you know what, I'll just go ahead and charge, something very, very materialistic, and I'll have no problem paying it off. And lo and behold, 3 years later, I was still paying it off.
And so how did that feel?
Looking back, it was very stupid of me, obviously. At the time, I honestly just thought, hey, that's just the way it is, and really had very little guidance in terms of what to do or what not to do. And so, the moral to the story is that, in my dealings with my son, who is now in the same position from a college perspective, he has a very different attitude towards credit cards than I did when I was his age.
So, and the point here is to just tell some stories. We don't, and it's a system, right? I mean, I know when my oldest went away to college, they were giving out, like, you signed up for a credit card at the University of Cincinnati, and they would give you a coupon for a pizza or a Frisbee. And it was a real marketing, like they would give you stuff away to give you a credit card, right? And, Gene, why were they doing that?
They were seducing you into a system that was going to be detrimental to you.
Right. So we don't want to, the point of this, we really want to get people to think beyond getting in debt is a personal failing. Because there's a whole system that's rigged to capture people. Reverend Dallison, does that make sense? I think you're muted.
I said definitely so, and so many people are impacted or affected by it. And certainly, at a young age, when they try to rope you in or bring you into it at such a young age, they know you have potential in terms of income. And personally, I had a child that my daughter was caught up in that kind of that payday situation and had to bail her out of that. So I knew how exasperating that was, because it just brought her to a place where you couldn't even figure out how to get out of it, because it's kind of a way, it's a trap, literally.
Right. And so there's embarrassment that goes with that.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Desperation, there's kind of hopelessness. I mean, all those kinds of things are connected. So and then, what was the impact of that debt is the kind of fourth discussion question. Just to kind of share that again. So these three questions, it's really important that you think about how you want to answer, because the gut reaction is one thing, but then kind of walking through, these points is kind of important. Reverend Lucky, when you see that question, what has your faith tradition taught you about the debt system? I mean, how do you think you're going to answer that?
My answer is that my faith tradition didn't teach me much about that at all. Taught me a lot about personal responsibility, but really didn't have anything to say about the system at all.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say that I first learned the real impact and how this works through DART, through this presentation and others like it. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's the first question, is to kind of get people thinking about, and really this is unmasking in some ways the relationship between the political system, the value shaping system, the economic system, and the primary way in which values are passed on, that feeds the credit card industry, is through advertising, through Madison Avenue, and the values that they teach us. So we'll get into that as we go through the session, but this is setting up that conversation. So then when we kind of come back, so we start out with a credit card example. We go into this kind of discussion. Then we come back, and Anne-Marie will kind of, really lift up this tension between these competing value systems. And
hey, John.
so, yes.
Sorry, this is Josh from Impact. Before we move on to the next session, I just imagine some folks might say, well, mortgage is not a bad debt. You're getting equity, you're building something. How do you recommend we kind of respond to that?
Well, this is there are people that are underwater on their mortgages because of corrupt mortgage practices of 2008, 2009, 2010. And we're just asking a question. Have you been caught up in the debt system? And so there were, we could go chapter. And so this should not be a situation where anybody is evaluating somebody else's debt. So like if I said, yeah, I bought a house and we were underwater on our mortgage, or we were approved for mortgage we couldn't afford, and it was really debilitating, and we had to declare bankruptcy, blah, blah, blah. Your job as a facilitator would be to acknowledge that and call on the next person. And if somebody were to say, well, mortgage isn't a bad debt, you say, well, we're not evaluating what's good or bad debt. We're listening to each other's stories, right? That's a way to kind of keep that conversation on par. Yeah, sort of. Boy, if you want to get immersed in the whole corruption of the mortgage industry, read some of those. The Big Short by Mike Lewis would be one book to kind of get a sense for that. Or just watch the movie. The next topic is kind of getting into these competing value systems. And so the basic idea is, in our faith traditions, most of you're all clergy, so you won't make this mistake, but sometimes we ask people, what's the great commandment? And they give us the Great Commission, or they give us the golden rules. So the great commandment, as we all know, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And so the idea there is, and that's Christian, but it's also not uniquely Christian. I mean, Jesus has taken two parts of Torah and pushing them together like a good rabbi. I mean, I would say like a good rabbi. And there's analogous sayings attributed to Muhammad and the Hadith, and so that'll be kind of explained. But in all these things, what gives life meaning then is relationships with God, relationships with neighbor. And what does the market God tell us gives life meaning? It's having more and better things. And if more and better things gives your life meaning, then you need credit cards, then you need debt, then you need, you need to get in debt to acquire these things. That's kind of the premise. So discussion question number 2 in the second breakout group. So that would be presented. And then in the second breakout group, we would talk about what are the relationships that give life meaning, and you'll want to think about that and remember, what Anne-Marie has kind of just presented, but it's hinged on the great commandment: love of God, love of neighbor. I mean, this is also a chance for you to elaborate on love of neighbor. Some of you know the context in the Gospel of Luke when Jesus asks, or Jesus is quizzed. He says, love your neighbor, and he's quizzed, who is my neighbor? I mean, some of you know what the answer is that Jesus gives, right? You're nodding your heads. Reverend Lucky?
He tells the story of the Good Samaritan.
Right. And why is that important as we think about who's my neighbor?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the person in need and the relationship of one to the other.
Right. Well, and it puts and that story puts the Samaritan kind of front and center as being a neighbor. And the Samaritans in the time of Jesus were pretty well despised, and for all kinds of reasons. So, it's not necessarily your next door neighbor, right? That's sort of which is sometimes when people hear that. I mean, it's what I hear when I hear that story. So, and then so that's kind of thinking about that and drawing that out of people. What sort of relationships give life meaning? And then what possessions, things, or experience do you look to for happiness? Now, we're asking you in this session to be a little bit confessional. So, what competes with the God of justice says it's relationships. And so, but all of us, we're part of this culture, right? And so if you could be confessional, what competes? How does the market God capture your attention? What things does the market God offer you that are seductive? Jean? Cooley?
And most confessionally, I have pondered the fact my husband lived in a high quality continuing care community.
Okay.
And it's lovely. When we bought in, we could afford it. They will take care of us for life. It's a nonprofit, and so if we lose all our income. But I realized that most of the staff, those that serve us, housekeeping, and our African-American young people and the certified nursing assistants are now under tremendous pressure. In fact, several have lost their jobs because they contracted COVID. And we pay them, the going rate, which is barely livable.
Okay.
And if we paid them more, we would have to pay more monthly. And I'm willing to do that. But it's a, getting into conversation about that with neighbors, it's really tough.
Okay.
So my security comes at the cost of some lives.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts, other ways in which, you're seduced? Do you feel like you're seduced by the market God? That you look to possessions, things, or experiences to give your life meaning?
For me, I would say to have a few nights a week at the end of the day to sit down and have a little glass of Kentucky bourbon, and I find myself that I don't have that fine of a palate, but I will find a way to enjoy a $50 bottle or a drink from a $50 bottle of bourbon more than I would from a $20 bottle of bourbon, just for the brand name and the advertising, and particularly if I'm in a group, if I'm going to bring some bourbon, and I don't think anybody tastes a whole lot of the differences myself, at least the crowd I hang around with, I'll bring the more expensive bottle.
Okay. So the point of this is not to get us thinking about where do our loyalties lie. And we live in this culture, we breathe in this culture that is dominated by the market God, and it's very easy, it's impossible to resist, the ways it captures our imagination. So, I think I selected the wrong, okay, sorry, I selected the wrong share. Okay. So, and then, when do you give deference to the cult of money? What's the context? And so if we can get people thinking about that, that's, very helpful. So then we'll come back and we'll kind of do an overview of, go ahead.
This is Ron. What is deference here?
So deference, preference, I mean, it's kind of, is there a clear way to say that? When do you, so Father Dan, I guess, picks Basil and Hayden as opposed to, I don't know what your other bullet bourbon, as he gives deference to the market God when he's going to the liquor store and picking something to bring to his friends. Or when do you give allegiance? Maybe there's a better way to ask that question. We can edit that. Okay.
John, I think in the past we've asked, we've even said, when have you been like seduced by the market God, or
okay, right.
when have you realized that you're beholden to it?
Right.
Well, the way we're taught, even we give big business people, front table at a banquet, or right. We defer. That's
right.
the thought that comes to my mind.
Okay. Well, you're right.
owners of property, well, it's their money, and maybe they were tax subsidized to create that, so it's a little complicated.
Right. Well, certainly, I mean, we give a lot of, we talk a lot in a corporate drive about, we want to build relationships of mutual respect with business leaders in our community. And then when we go out, half the time we don't act like it. We defer to them. And it's like we're looking for their approval rather than demanding it, or expecting it, which is a very difficult psychological thing to kind of adjust to on a corporate campaign, for example. Or we, holding the mayor or the governor or somebody accountable can be a very challenging thing because we're used to giving deference to people in power. So it's some of that. Thanks, Holly, for clarifying that. That's good. So then we'll come back and so we'll have the second discussion. We come back and Anne Marie will lead us through a conversation about the kind of different stories and kind of review Pharaoh's narrative and the story of scarcity, the story of fear, and the story of despair. And now here's where it gets complicated. And although, so some of you, so then we're going to give everybody who's there a chance to delve into one of these stories. And so she'll give some reactions, like, I mean, it's in the top of our minds right now, how the story of fear drives policing and police practices. Like, we're trained, the Pharaoh and the market god trains us to believe, I mean, if you just watch TV shows, right? Crime dramas, that African-American males, young African-American males are scary. And they're out to steal your stuff. And, we've got to be careful. We've got to lock them up. That's kind of the story that's told. Does anyone recognize that story? I mean, now God's story is a story of hope and promise and abundance. And so she'll walk through like the scarcity, fear, and despair, and how our organizations have flipped those scripts, if you will, from scarcity to abundance. There's not enough money for an affordable housing trust fund, but we build power. And the mayor of Lexington was going to cut $1.8 million from the affordable housing trust fund, because of COVID-19 and their scarcity. That's the story of scarcity. And you guys rallied and got $1.8 million restored, even when you couldn't meet in the same place. You had to drive cars into the parking lot at Father Dan's church. And so that was witnessing to the story of abundance, right? So anyway, that'll be laid out. And your job is to guide people through these stories. So you'll want to think about, like, for your own example, first of all, your gut reaction. What's your gut reaction to the story of scarcity? And then how have you heard the myth of scarcity in your community? So, Doug, what's one way in which you've heard the myth of scarcity in Topeka?
Well, it kind of mirrors the what you just recalled about Lexington. There's just not enough money. We're being overtaxed. So there's just, no way that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund could be funded. And that we've heard that going on, 3 or 4 years now.
Right.
And it's obviously it's not true. People
Right.
spend money where they want to spend money.
Right. And what about the story of fear? Reverend Dollison, where have you heard the myth of fear in Lakeland or Winter Haven, Polk County?
I'm sorry there. I had to get myself unmuted there.
That's right.
The myth of fear in this county, I guess from many different areas, I guess primarily, but with the police and law enforcement and those issues, you know, because there are many within the community concerning, you know, that people have just concerns about, or you know, just in general, like part of this culture, you know.
Okay. And then the myth of despair. You know, Father Hoffman, where have you heard the myth of despair in Volusia?
I think probably related to civil citations in a sense, that ultimately kids are going to get into trouble, they need to be arrested, and that sort of thing. That's not really despair directly, but I think also maybe another place would be that there's no reason to have a drug treatment center in the jail, because these people are just drug addicts anyways. It's wasting of money. It doesn't going to help. So that would probably be a clearer example of despair.
Okay. All right. So we will make sure that you have your assignment about kind of which of these discussion groups by Thursday of next week. But you'll want to be, whatever group you're in, you'll want to walk through whether it's scarcity, fear, despair, what's the myth you've heard, and then second, the last question is, how has your organization either witnessed to the story of abundance or to the story of hope or to the story of promise? So you want to think through that and kind of guide that conversation. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay. And
I have a question.
Yeah.
Again, in that particular discussion group, will it be composed of people from your organization, or will it be various organizations?
Various organizations.
Okay.
Right. And then the next thing is to kind of we're going to set up a conversation about so we've got this kind of competing stories, competing value systems, and the competing stories that the Pharaoh tells about our world. And then we want to look at some examples of how prophets in our traditions have confronted these they're institutions actually. And so we're going to kind of break people into 3 different groups that would look at 3 different historical prophets. So Amos, Martin Luther King, and Matthew, Jesus in Matthew 23, 23 and 24. And we're going to organize these groups. There's a way in which Matthew 23, 23 and 24 can be heard that's anti-Semitic. So, and it's part of the Christian tradition. I think when it's anti-Semitic, it's taken out of context, but we want to challenge it. And really, I mean, when I hear Jesus saying, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees," I hear him as saying, woe to you, pastors, bishops, cardinals. That's how I hear it. I mean, Jesus is speaking to the contemporary religious leaders of his day. You know, the religious leaders of our day are you and our fellow clergy, not primarily rabbis. At least that's not my context. So with that in mind, we are going to make sure that we're going to place Christians in Matthew 23, and then if there are Jewish leaders, they'll either be in Amos or Martin Luther King. And for the purposes, I'm just going to double check, but I think with your group, with the clergy that are on this call, we will make sure that you're assigned to Matthew 23, 23 and 24. And and in each of these questions, each of these texts, or we want you to kind of think about kind of three things. Who does the prophet address? How does the prophet feel? And what problem does the prophet address? And so for Matthew 23 and 24, which you will all be leading, you'll want to make it clear that who is the prophet addressing? Like, this is not an excuse for anti-Semitism. Like, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. It's not historically accurate to say that Jesus is targeting the Jewish faith, because Jesus is a Jew at this time, and he's speaking to his contemporary, religious leaders. Does that make sense? I mean, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on that. Pastor Bowden?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. So yeah, that's clear.
Okay.
I'm
Reverend?
taking notes as you speak. So
Okay. Reverend Lucky? Okay. Doug Smith? Okay. Gene? Father Chris?
Absolutely.
Okay. Father Dan? And Reverend Dollison?
Yes.
Okay. So who does the prophet address? How does the prophet feel? And in each of these texts, Amos says, I despise your feast. Very strong words. And Martin Luther King says, well, what is it down here? Sometimes, some days of the week I can quote it. This is just, the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. Right? That's how Martin Luther King. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. He is ticked off, right? And Jesus says, woe to you. Those are very strong words as well. And so which problem does the prophet address? And, for Amos, the problem is he's ministering in the northern kingdom. And there's gross injustice, and the people, the political leaders, the leaders of the shrines are focused on having good worship, and they ignore injustice around them. Martin Luther King, I think we know that the letter from Birmingham jail is in response to a letter from some white, quote, moderate clergy, unquote, who this is not the right time to press for integration. It's not the right time to press for good schools. Like, when have we heard that? And then Jesus is frustrated because the weightier matter, they tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but ignore the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. It's kind of sort of is to get us thinking about the appropriate response to injustice is anger and action and accountability, and that's kind of the focus of that discussion group. Any thoughts, reactions, Reverend Dollison?
I'm good.
Okay. Father Dan?
I understand it, and I can see where that could be there'd be some powerful sharing there.
Right. And so that's the last discussion group, right? And then it kind of sets up a closing, kind of rousing call to action, if you will. About how there's a way in which justice ministry is when you convene 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people in a room, and you're witnessing to the story of abundance and hope and promise, that you are confronting the mark of God, and you are challenging, at least for that night, your whole city to turn around. So in that sense, repentance, to turn away from those stories of scarcity, fear, and despair, and step into God's story of abundance, hope, and promise. So that's kind of the concluding point of that presentation. So kind of thinking about that flow, thinking about those discussions, it is what you're doing really helps us move people in these conversations. Because if we were just doing it, again, you're the ones who are checking in with folks and kind of listening and helping them talk through these kind of concepts. So we'll just kind of check in around the group. Lorna, what's one takeaway from this kind of discussion, and what's one question you have about leading the group?
I think there's some powerful thoughts here that really hit us in the season that we're in right now. I think the question was asked in the chat room a little bit earlier about do we allow each participant to answer all the questions at once, or do we take each question and go around each time? Would be the only question I have.
Yeah, they're intended to be, they're laid out so that you ask one question at a time, you answer it, call on each person, answer the next question.
Got it.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Reverend Lucky?
No, everything's very clear. The only question is, will there be an organizer in each group? And if so, do they make responses as well?
There's not likely to be an organizer in your group. We're all hands on deck. We will have, this presentation will be going on simultaneously with the prophetic call. We expect there'll be 30 breakout groups in the prophetic call and 17 or 20 in this group. And so no, there will not be enough. There will probably not be an organizer in the group. There might be a couple. If there are, it would be fine to treat them as participants.
Okay.
Doug?
My only question, I think it was already asked, I'm not sure if it was answered, is how many people will be in each group? And is 15 minutes enough for that particular number in each group?
Right. Well, so you may want to be kind of discreet on some of these. Like, that's a good question. I think like on this last piece on discussion question number 4, and we could clarify some of our advice about this, I guess. But so if you look at that screen there, who does the prophet address? You could ask one person that question. That's because that's not really up for debate. And then how does the prophet feel? And then, what problem does the prophet address? That's the key question. So make sure everybody asks that question, on that one. Like on the discussion question 3, like if you are moderating this and you say, what's your gut reaction to the story of scarcity? Like you give a gut reaction. If you give a good model, you'll get a clear, succinct kind of answer. So you'll have to think about each of these questions before the discussion group. Really read that over and prepare so you can model succinct answers. And the same thing goes with how have you heard the myth of scarcity in your community? That's probably, of those questions, that's the most important one, to get people to think about those myths in their community. And then if you have time, or if you can give a succinct answer to how your organization has witnessed to the stories of abundance, hope, and promise. And then, discussion question 2, again, like number 1, you could select one person to answer that question because it's from the, it's based on the Great Commandment. We can refine this and kind of get you some. That's a good point. Maybe call on one person you know, and maybe the question is based on the great commandment and associated teachings, what relationships give life meaning? Maybe that's a better way to do that. So we'll go through that and kind of edit it. Again, gut reaction to the story of credit cards and usury, model a succinct statement that's a gut reaction, and then kind of call on people. Yeah, that's that clearer. You'll have to pay attention. These groups have like 15 to 20 minutes for discussion. So there's a really the focus question. I mean, the most important question, number one, is 3. You know, have you, a friend, a family member, been caught up in the debt system? What does that feel like? For number 2, you know, we want to get people to think about when do they give deference to the cult of money, and then what are the number discussion group 3 is where have you heard the myths? You know, myths of scarcity, fear, despair, and number 4 is what problem does the prophet address? So in each of your groups.
When you guys edit this document, could you put like reorder the question so that the most important question is number 1?
Well, we'll I mean, on discussion 4, for example, I think you want to set that up. You want to ask one person, who does the prophet address? But that doesn't, you know, we don't need everybody to comment on that.
No.
And then that one sets up the other 2. How does the prophet feel? You can give a succinct answer to that. And then what problem does the prophet address? But you've got to think about that as a facilitator. And we'll try and we'll put some more language in there so we get more, you know, so it's a little easier to follow. That's a very good point, Doug. Thanks for raising it. Jean?
Yeah, I keep thinking about this as the knowing in our long-term work that when people get this, they really are able to translate into the passion of work for justice. If they can understand the myth of scarcity and how we have been seduced by our leaders and those who should be caring for the least of ours, are spreading this myth and propagating this, I think then people really do get what we're doing. And we use this narrative a lot in our assemblies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that many people have had the opportunity to delve into it. So I think this is super important.
Okay, good. Any questions about the
process?
This training yeah.
I'm wondering about particularly the first one, going around the room, around the circle, with each question separately, rather than getting people to do their narrative 1 through 4 at a time. Just it seems to be to pull a person's story together.
Okay.
Just my thought.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that. Father Chris?
Like others, I think for me, to finally understand this story and how it relates to the culture in which we live, money, debt, fundraising, I mean, everything, that has helped immensely. So I think that for most of the people that will be attending this, it'll probably be new territory, but maybe not for all. So I guess I don't really have a question, but more of an observation from when I've done discussions like this at the clergy conferences is it takes a while for some folks to really understand what we're saying or what we're getting at, or what the scriptures are saying, or what the discussion is leading us into. So it sometimes takes a little bit of time to kind of pull that out for individuals to see things maybe more clearly.
Okay, appreciate that. It's good, and it's a work in progress. And great. Okay, Father Dan.
I think for me, a takeaway is to really take those questions, the key questions that require maybe a personal story and all. I think that that so much sets the tones and can reveal where we're at. And the word that's used in the paper, there's modeling, but that's it's so important to get that. For me, really have a challenge to spend the time to get that right, have it be a story for the power of a testimony, but also for it just to be clear and also succinct, for all of that. That's, for me, that's a challenge that I think with that this helps. This will really help me meet.
Okay, all right. Reverend Dollison.
Yes, I think too. I guess after being able to ponder it and think about it, but I think it certainly will be very helpful and insightful for many to share. And again, because I think because we're living in very challenging times today, I think our focus is a little more toward these concerns and efforts that people sometimes tend to take for granted or take lightly.
Okay. I know I saw Arthur, I think you joined us. I don't know when you came in.
Yeah, you were well into the discussion and on the modeling on and the questions for the prophets, the 3 prophets. I was given the invalid link, so Leah finally got it to me, but that was about, what was it, about quarter to 3, so it hadn't been very, I've listened to everything, and I wasn't sure whether I'm in the right training session or not. Sounds like everybody else might be a minister of some sort, so I wasn't sure whether I got put in the right section.
You're fine. You're good. Not everybody in here is going to be
I understand that it was recorded, so I can go back. I plan to go back and listen from the very beginning.
Okay, very good. Okay. And Night 014, I'm not sure who that is, but
what happened, I've got 2 computers here, so both Night 014 and 3900 are both Arthur McFarland.
Okay, all right, very good. So any of the organizers, additional kind of comments, Holly, Rob, Josh, Andy, Leah, Jennifer?
I would just say for everybody else that the groups that we're going to have for this discussion are a little more experienced. So they're either lay leaders with 5 or more network members already, or clergy that have been around. So we can't assume what everybody understands, but they're not brand new.
That's a good point. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Josh?
Yeah, I'm just excited that we actually get to discuss it. I mean, as a staff person, you want to have one-to-ones with leaders in between sessions, and it's hard to get it all, the things to check in on. And so I'm looking forward to that. I don't think I have any other questions, but I may text something later.
Okay. All right. Andy?
Do I understand correctly that for each of these discussion 1, 2, we're going to go in and out of the main room? So we'll do the first one, then go back to the main room for more presenting, and then come back?
Yes.
And it's going to be the same people each time?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Leah?
No questions. I think this discussion is going to be really rich, and so I'm just grateful for all of you taking the time today and to just make sure that you're clear on all of this before the conference. So, like John said, just contact any of us if you have any questions at all. And John, we're going to make a few slight revisions. Is that what I heard?
Probably we need to do that. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and then we'll send those out to you.
Right. Rob?
I'm good.
Okay. Freddie?
I don't have any questions. I'm excited.
Okay. Jennifer?
No questions. Only advice from having trained in like house meeting discussions would be the more personal your own examples, usually the more willing others are to share personal examples and have a richer discussion. So definitely gonna take some time to think through my own answers to those and have them jotted down ahead of time.
Right. As Holly said, this is the group that will, many of them will have seen the prophetic call. Some will have seen this presentation, maybe, but not had a chance to discuss it. I appreciate everybody, pitching in on this. I think this is very exciting. I think there's a potential for people to really have, some breakthroughs. I think what Gene Cooley said is absolutely true. When people get this, like their ownership for the justice ministry can be so much deeper, and you're gonna play a critical role in making that happen. And I'm very excited to see how this turns out. We had a training this morning for the prophetic call group, and when we put this together, we were really leaning a lot on our experience with Robert Linthicum when he taught us the prophetic call material the first round, which was, for me, was in the 90s. And it was what we do in an hour, he used to do in 3 hours, and he did it because he broke us into groups and we had the text study. And we don't always have time to do that. But we decided we needed to make time for more discussion because of the Zoom format. And to the extent that works, it's because you are committing your time to kind of engage people with this. And I think that's so important. And I'm so grateful to have such a team of people to work with on this kind of thing. So it's deeply appreciated, and it's inspiring for me. Amen. Okay. Leah, any closing words?
No, you did it.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Holly? Okay. Have a great one. Have a good holiday.
I will.
Very good. You all. Have a good
Bye,
weekend.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Safe.
Father Dan and Jennifer. Oops.
Father Dan.